The day we banned humanity from war was the first time I witnessed fear ripple through species that had never known defeat. The grand convocation chamber floated at the heart of neutral space, a cathedral of suspended gravity wells and prismatic light. Delegates from 100 civilizations occupied their assigned atmospheres: methane veils, ionized mist, liquid suspension fields. The air trembled with layered frequencies of translation. And beneath it all was something unfamiliar: silence. The high arbiter of the council rose from his levitating dais, his exoskeletal mantle shimmering under the chamber's twin stars. When he spoke, his voice oscillated through 17 spectrums at once. By unanimous emergency decree, humanity of soul is henceforth prohibited from participation in sanctioned interstellar warfare, effective immediately. The words struck harder than any kinetic barrage. A ban. On humans. Officially, it was framed as precaution, a stabilization initiative. The phrasing scrolled in sterile diplomatic script across the chamber's holographic bands: protective measure, strategic equilibrium, conflict mitigation. But I had studied the battlefield data. I knew the truth. The first time humans entered galactic conflict, they were dismissed as biological amateurs, oxygen breathers with fragile endoskeletons and volatile emotional patterns. Their ships were modular and inelegant, their weapon systems primitive compared to our refined gravitic arrays. Yet within 3 cycles of combat exposure, their hulls changed. Plasma artillery that once tore through their fleets began scattering off improvised reflective composites. Psychic assault waves that shattered Drivari command nodes met disciplined human neural countertraining. Orbital sieges designed to starve worlds into surrender became hunting grounds as humans redirected debris fields into kinetic kill zones. They did not overpower us with superior technology. They observed, they learned, they adapted. And they did so at a velocity our evolutionary algorithms could not match. The chamber lights dimmed further as archived combat footage shimmered into view above us. Human vessels drifting, burning, then reconfiguring mid-battle. Boarding parties advancing despite catastrophic losses. Improvised strategies forming in real time. Where another species would retreat to reassess, humans advanced to experiment. Casualty projections that would have triggered mass surrender in any other civilization instead provoked something else within them: determination. The vote to ban them had been conducted prior to this public announcement. I had seen the sealed tallies. Unanimous. Not even the Drivari war clans, who worship conflict as sacred proving, had dissented. Not the Threx Dominion, whose pride once drove them to challenge stellar leviathans. They all agreed, because each of them had run the simulations. In every long-term scenario, human strategic growth curves did not plateau. They accelerated. I shifted my sensory array toward the Soul Delegation quadrant. The human ambassador stood alone within an oxygen envelope, gravity tuned to Earth's standard. Compared to the towering Threx or the armored Drivari generals, he appeared almost frail. 2 arms, 2 legs, unarmored skin partially concealed beneath dark fabric. Biologically inferior by most measurable metrics. And yet the chamber's attention orbited him like a singularity. He did not interrupt the decree. He did not protest. He simply listened. When the arbiter concluded, an artificial chime signaled the ratification. The ban embedded itself into interstellar law. For a moment, no one moved. Then the murmuring began. Low-frequency clicks of relief from the Varel, subsonic rumblings of tension dispersal from the Threx. Even the Drivari's battle crests dimmed as if some unseen threat had been neutralized. Neutralized. That was the word they chose in private session. Not regulated, not restricted, neutralized. I remembered the closed-door simulations, the ones not shown to the public chamber. Scenarios where human adaptive warfare outpaced collective doctrine, where their willingness to incur sacrifice destabilized conventional deterrence theory, where, given sufficient time, they rewrote the very mathematics of conflict. Humans did not treat war as ritual. They treated it as problem-solving, and they solved problems ruthlessly. The Arbiter turned toward the Sol delegation. The Council acknowledges humanity's contributions to galactic defense and affirms continued partnership in non-combat sectors. A polite exile, a velvet containment. All eyes focused on the human ambassador. He inclined his head, a subtle Earth gesture I had researched extensively. Respect, acceptance. Humanity recognizes the Council's decision. His voice carried through universal translators, calm and steady. We remain committed to the stability and prosperity of the galaxy. No tremor, no anger, no surprise. That was what unsettled me most. I extended my perception toward his biosignature. Elevated heart rate, but not erratic. Stress indicators within controlled parameters. Cortisol spike, minimal. He had anticipated this. They entered the swarm at full burn. Our long-range feeds filled with static as bioacid interference intensified. Human ships vanished one by one, their signatures flaring and extinguishing. Then a transmission pierced the distortion. A human captain, hull integrity collapsing, internal atmosphere venting in vaporous plumes. "If this works," he said, voice strained but steady, "tell them we're not done yet." Behind him, I glimpsed crew members securing themselves to bulkheads as corrosive tendrils breached the viewport. The feed cut. Moments later, gravitational readings spiked. The synchronized anchors activated within the swarm's core, collapsing internal mass inward. The living conglomerate convulsed, fractal clusters tearing free from central cohesion. For the first time since its arrival, the swarm fragmented uncontrollably. Human cargo haulers detonated in cascading sequence, amplifying the implosion. Shock waves rippled outward, shredding connective tissue between clusters. The bioacid clouds dissipated. The swarm, an extinction-level force that had erased civilizations in silence, began to die. Not instantly, not cleanly, but irreversibly. Residual clusters attempted to regroup, but without core coordination, they devolved into manageable fragments. Council fleets, repositioned at safe distance, eliminated the remnants within days. Zareth ended not with a triumphant armada, but with debris fields filled with human wreckage. We analyzed the aftermath for cycles. The humans had not possessed superior weapons. They had not outmatched the swarm in raw power. They had identified weakness within inevitability. They had accepted catastrophic loss as operational variable. They had weaponized sacrifice. For the first time in recorded galactic history, an extinction-level threat had been neutralized not by technological supremacy, but by strategy, adaptation, and terrifying persistence. The whispers began almost immediately. If humans were willing to incur such losses against an external horror, what would they endure in a war of ideology? If they could study annihilation and derive advantage, what limits constrained them? I attended the memorial transmission from Earth weeks later. Billions gathered beneath their atmosphere, mourning the fallen. They wept, and then they rebuilt. Shipyards expanded, tactical doctrines updated, training regimens revised using Zareth data. They honored their dead by improving. That was the moment comprehension settled like gravitational weight upon the Council. Humans did not merely survive extinction events, they learned from them. They did not fear annihilation, they calculated it, they accepted it, and when necessary, they weaponized it. Zareth was the war that saved us. It was also the war that taught us what humanity truly was. And once that lesson was learned, the ban became inevitable. We should have limited them. That was the intention after Zareth. Humans were granted participation only in defensive capacities, escort fleets, advisory councils, reconstruction security, controlled exposure, structured deployments, carefully monitored parameters. We told ourselves we had learned caution. We had not learned nearly enough. The first post-Zareth test was the Korath border conflict, a minor territorial dispute between two mid-tier powers. Predictable skirmishes, contained aggression, the kind of war our simulations could model with comfortable accuracy. Humans were assigned logistical oversight and drone support. Within 43 minutes of engagement, humans rewrote the battlefield. Korath forces deployed autonomous attack drones calibrated to counter known Council formations. The humans observed their firing cadence, their sensor sweep timing, their micro-delays in retargeting. Then, mid-combat, human technicians remotely modified Allied drones. Not upgrades, mutations. Targeting priorities shifted, movement algorithms randomized, signal echoes mimicked retreat patterns. The battlefield became a hall of mirrors. Korath commanders believed they were routing a disorganized defense. They advanced aggressively. That was when human-modified drones detonated kinetic charges behind their flanks, having circled undetected under altered thermal profiles. The conflict ended in hours. The official report credited rapid adaptive coordination. The private analysis used a different phrase: escalation beyond authorization. In the Solaris revolt, the pattern deepened. Humans were present only as observers when insurgent forces seized 3 planetary capitals simultaneously. Infrastructure collapsed, communication arrays fell, local security grids fragmented. Standard doctrine required reinforcement fleets. Humans requested access to civilian networks. Denied. They accessed them anyway. Within hours, public transit systems were repurposed for covert troop movement. Agricultural drones became surveillance units. Civilian broadcast channels transmitted coded resistance instructions embedded in entertainment streams. Power grids were rerouted to overload supply support caches. Water purification plants concealed encrypted command nodes. Humans turned cities into organisms, responsive, coordinated, defiant. The revolt collapsed before Council reinforcements arrived. When questioned, the human liaison simply stated, "Resources are contextual." That was when unease began to crystallize. Because every engagement followed the same rhythm. They would arrive underestimated, physically unimposing, technologically unrefined compared to elder civilizations. They would observe in silence. They would ask questions others considered irrelevant. Then they would adapt. And once adaptation reached critical mass, they would escalate. Not recklessly, not emotionally, creatively. That was what frightened us. They studied not only enemy weapons, but enemy psychology. In one documented encounter, human forces deliberately exposed a vulnerable flank, transmitting falsified stress signals across open channels. Opposing commanders, conditioned to exploit weakness, advanced. Hidden human artillery, calibrated using cultural analysis of enemy pride hierarchies, targeted command vessels first. The battle ended not with slaughter, but with paralysis. Humans understood something we did not. War was not solely material, it was cognitive. They studied alien biology, where stress hormones spiked, how sensory organs overloaded, which frequencies induced hesitation. They tailored battlefield stimuli accordingly. Against species reliant on hive coordination, they introduced noise into synchronization bands. Against honor-bound militaries, they engineered scenarios that forced impossible moral choices. Against algorithmic fleets, they introduced randomness. They did not overpower systems, they destabilized them. Between conflicts, they improved. After Korath, their drone protocols updated across their entire fleet. After Solaris, civilian-military integration models became standardized in human colonies. Each war was a lesson. Each lesson became infrastructure. Our predictive models, refined over millennia, began returning error margins outside acceptable thresholds. Human response curves did not align with historical precedent. Casualty tolerance remained volatile but functional. Strategic shifts occurred mid-engagement without hierarchical delay. No algorithm could reliably forecast their improvisation. More troubling, other species began imitating them. Dravari commanders adopted decentralized strike cells. Threx engineers experimented with modular ship design. Virel tacticians studied human psychological mapping. Human doctrine spread like contagion. Warfare accelerated. Battles shortened, but their intensity increased. Front lines dissolved into fluid engagements. Civilian sectors blurred with military logistics. Conflict became less ritualized, less predictable.
Less contained. The galaxy, in subtle ways, was becoming human. I attended a restricted elite symposium shortly after the Solaris incident. Data projections hovered in the center of the chamber, trend lines curving upward in volatile arcs. Adaptive contamination, one Threx strategist called it. Doctrinal destabilization, corrected a Varel analyst. The Dravari representative was more direct. They are rewriting the rules. Silence followed, because none of us could deny it. Humans did not merely participate in conflict, they transformed it. And transformation is not easily reversed. The fear was not that humanity would conquer us through brute force. It was that prolonged exposure to them would render traditional deterrence obsolete. If every species adopted human escalation patterns, rapid adaptation, psychological targeting, infrastructure weaponization, then no equilibrium could hold. Containment was first mentioned not in public session, but in whispers. Limit their deployments, restrict their combat exposure, slow the spread. Not containment of an enemy, containment of an ally. I remember reviewing one final projection before the decision matured into policy. A long-term simulation. Human participation in open warfare over 3 centuries. The outcome was not galactic domination. It was systemic instability, constant evolution, perpetual escalation, no static balance. A galaxy forever adapting to humanity, and therefore never at rest. When I exited the symposium, I encountered a human officer in the corridor. He was studying a star map, adjusting projected trade routes with absent focus. "Do you ever stop improving?" I asked him, curiosity overriding protocol. He considered the question seriously. "We try not to," he replied. It was not arrogance. It was instinct. And in that simple answer lay the truth that unsettled the elite more than any battlefield statistic. Humans did not escalate because they were ordered to. They escalated because standing still felt like extinction. That was when containment shifted from theory to inevitability. We should have limited them. That was the intention after Zareth. Humans were granted participation only in defensive capacities, escort fleets, advisory councils, reconstruction security, controlled exposure, structured deployments, carefully monitored parameters. We told ourselves we had learned caution. We had not learned nearly enough. The first post-Zareth test was the Korath border conflict, a minor territorial dispute between 2 mid-tier powers. Predictable skirmishes, contained aggression, the kind of war our simulations could model with comfortable accuracy. Humans were assigned logistical oversight and drone support. Within 43 minutes of engagement, they rewrote the battlefield. Korath forces deployed autonomous attack drones calibrated to counter known council formations. The humans observed their firing cadence, their sensor sweep timing, their micro-delays in retargeting. Then, mid-combat, human technicians remotely modified allied drones. Not upgrades, mutations. Targeting priorities shifted, movement algorithms randomized, signal echoes mimicked retreat patterns. The battlefield became a hall of mirrors. Korath commanders believed they were routing a disorganized defense. They advanced aggressively. That was when human-modified drones detonated kinetic charges behind their flanks, having circled undetected under altered thermal profiles. The conflict ended in hours. The official report credited rapid adaptive coordination. The private analysis used a different phrase: escalation beyond authorization. In the Solaris revolt, the pattern deepened. Humans were present only as observers when insurgent forces seized 3 planetary capitals simultaneously. Infrastructure collapsed, communication arrays fell, local security grids fragmented. Standard doctrine required reinforcement fleets. Humans requested access to civilian networks. Denied. They accessed them anyway.
Within hours, public transit systems were repurposed for covert troop movement. Agricultural drones became surveillance units. Civilian broadcast channels transmitted coded resistance instructions embedded in entertainment streams. Power grids were rerouted to overload insurgent supply caches. Water purification plants concealed encrypted command nodes. Humans turned cities into organisms, responsive, coordinated, defiant. The revolt collapsed before council reinforcements arrived. That was when unease began to crystallize, because every engagement followed the same rhythm. They would arrive underestimated, physically unimposing, technologically unrefined compared to elder civilizations. They would observe in silence. They would ask questions others considered irrelevant. Then they would adapt. And once adaptation reached critical mass, they would escalate. Not recklessly, not emotionally, creatively. That was what frightened us. They studied not only enemy weapons, but enemy psychology. In one documented encounter, human forces deliberately exposed a vulnerable flank, transmitting falsified stress signals across open channels. Opposing commanders, conditioned to exploit weakness, advanced. Hidden human artillery, calibrated using cultural analysis of enemy pride hierarchies, targeted command vessels first. The battle ended not with slaughter, but with paralysis. Humans understood something we did not. War was not solely material, it was cognitive. They learned alien biology, where stress hormones spiked, how sensory organs overloaded, which frequencies induced hesitation. They tailored battlefield stimuli accordingly. Against species reliant on hive coordination, they introduced noise into synchronization bands. Against honor-bound militaries, they engineered scenarios that forced impossible moral choices. Against algorithmic fleets, they introduced randomness. They did not overpower systems. They destabilized them. Between conflicts, they improved. After Korath, their drone protocols updated across their entire fleet. After Solaris, civilian-military integration models became standardized in human colonies. Each war was a lesson. Each lesson became infrastructure. Our predictive models, refined over millennia, began returning error margins outside acceptable thresholds. Human response curves did not align with historical precedent. Casualty tolerance remained volatile but functional. Strategic shifts occurred mid-engagement without hierarchical delay. No algorithm could reliably forecast their improvisation. Even more troubling, other species began imitating them. Dravari commanders adopted decentralized strike cells. Threx engineers experimented with modular ship design. Viral tacticians studied human psychological mapping. Human doctrines spread like contagion. Warfare accelerated. Battles shortened, but their intensity increased. Front lines dissolved into fluid engagements. Civilian sectors blurred with military logistics.
Conflict became less ritualized, less predictable, less contained. The galaxy, in subtle ways, was becoming human. I attended a restricted elite symposium shortly after the Solaris incident. Data projections hovered in the center of the chamber, trend lines curving upward in volatile arcs. Adaptive contamination, one Threx strategist called it. Doctrinal destabilization, corrected a Virel analyst. The Dravari representative was more direct. Silence followed, because none of us could deny it. Humans did not merely participate in conflict, they transformed it. And transformation is not easily reversed. The fear was not that humanity would conquer us through brute force. It was that prolonged exposure to them would render traditional deterrence obsolete. If every species adopted human escalation patterns, rapid adaptation, psychological targeting, infrastructure weaponization, then no equilibrium could hold. Containment was first mentioned not in public session, but in whispers. Limit their deployments, restrict their combat exposure, slow the spread. Not containment of an enemy, containment of an ally. I remember reviewing one final projection before the decision matured into policy, a long-term simulation. Human participation in open warfare over 3 centuries. The outcome was not galactic domination, it was systemic instability, constant evolution, perpetual escalation, no static balance, a galaxy forever adapting to humanity, and therefore never at rest. When I exited the symposium, I encountered a human officer in the corridor. He was studying a star map, adjusting projected trade routes with absent focus. "Why do you escalate?" I asked him, curiosity overriding protocol. He considered the question seriously. "We try not to," he replied. It was not arrogance, it was instinct. And in that simple answer lay the truth that unsettled the elite more than any battlefield statistic. Humans did not escalate because they were ordered to. They escalated because standing still
felt like extinction. That was when containment shifted from theory to inevitability. We expected fury. We expected condemnation broadcasts from Seoul, economic retaliation, quiet mobilization. History suggested no civilization accepted strategic diminishment without resistance. Humanity surprised us again. Their ambassador returned to the convocation chamber within a single rotation of the decree. He stood beneath the same prismatic lights, oxygen envelope shimmering faintly, posture relaxed. Containment is our new standing. No accusation, no visible resentment, merely acknowledgement. Within months, human defense expenditures shifted publicly toward exploration initiatives, disaster response infrastructure, and interstellar humanitarian programs. Fleet yards once dedicated to warship production announced conversions to deep-range survey vessels and heavy evacuation carriers. It appeared compliant, constructive, peaceful. Too peaceful. At first, we interpreted the transition as political pragmatism.
Humans, perhaps, recognized their strategic disadvantage and chose integration over isolation. But then the acceleration began. Human engineering consortiums unveiled terraforming accelerators capable of stabilizing marginal worlds in half the projected time, atmospheric processors adaptable to variable biospheres, seismic dampening grids that could anchor tectonically unstable colonies. Their disaster response fleets were astonishing, vast, modular constructs equipped with medical bays, fabrication arrays, agricultural deployment pods, and mobile habitat rings. When a binary star system in the Orith expanse entered destabilization, threatening 3 inhabited worlds, it was not a council fleet that arrived first. It was human evacuation carriers. They deployed synchronized orbital mirrors to reduce solar flare impact. They repositioned asteroid shields into defensive arcs. They evacuated 6 million beings across species lines within 72 hours. They did not request compensation. They did not negotiate leverage. They simply acted. Trade corridors fractured by piracy in the outer sectors, human convoys reconstructed navigational buoys, integrating anti-ambush routing algorithms into civilian transit networks. A fungal plague swept through viral agricultural domes, human xenobiologists collaborated across encrypted channels, synthesizing adaptive nanotreatments in record time. Every crisis seemed to trigger the same response. Humans arrived, humans solved, humans improved the system afterward. They became indispensable. Council projections shifted accordingly. Economic dependency on human infrastructure rose incrementally, then sharply. Smaller civilizations began defaulting to human-designed logistical frameworks. Emergency protocols incorporated Seoul standard response matrices. They were everywhere, not as conquerors, as saviors. And that unsettled us more than any fleet maneuver, because even in peace, they optimized. I reviewed schematics of their so-called civilian fleets. The hulls were modular, yes, optimized for rapid reconfiguration in disaster scenarios, but modularity also allowed swift functional conversion. Power cores rated for evacuation support possessed output thresholds consistent with heavy tactical deployment. Fabrication arrays designed to construct habitat modules could just as easily produce armaments, if permitted. Their rescue AI demonstrated adaptive decision trees rivaling wartime command systems. During a mining colony collapse on Hethra 4, a human AI rerouted structural supports, coordinated drone swarms, and predicted cascading failures with battlefield-level precision. That word again, universal. They were not violating the ban. They were evolving around it. Human shipyards refined propulsion systems under the banner of exploration.
Long-range survey vessels incorporated sensor suites with unprecedented resolution, capable of mapping stellar phenomena, yes, but also capable of tracking fleet movements across light years. Medical nanite swarms designed to combat disease demonstrated programmable versatility that in different contexts could disable biological systems. Every innovation possessed dual potential, yet no evidence suggested malicious intent. That was the dilemma. If humans had resisted openly, the Council could have justified countermeasures. If they had stagnated, the ban would have achieved its purpose. Instead, they expanded into every non-combat domain with relentless focus. Their colonies flourished, education networks proliferated, civilian research funding surged, cultural exchange programs increased interspecies integration. Humans did not withdraw, they embedded. I attended a multi-species infrastructure summit on New Carthage, one of their rapidly terraformed worlds. Delegates from 6 civilizations collaborated on planetary resilience frameworks. Human architects presented models for adaptable city design, structures capable of reconfiguring under environmental stress, distributed energy grids resistant to systemic collapse.
But it was not fortification in the traditional sense. It was resilience. Human systems did not rely on singular points of failure. They decentralized authority, distributed resources, encouraged redundancy. In war, that made them difficult to defeat. In peace, it made them invaluable. And still, unease persisted, because every relief operation doubled as stress testing. Every evacuation refined logistical algorithms. Every medical breakthrough expanded biological understanding. They were learning without firing a shot. The elite commissioned quiet audits of human industrial capacity. Projections indicated that if the ban were lifted abruptly, humanity could reconstitute a competitive combat fleet within a fraction of the time previously required. Not because they had secretly stockpiled weapons, but because their civilian infrastructure was inherently adaptable. That was the revelation. Their true strength had never been raw military capability. It was continuity. When humans fought, they adapted. When humans rebuilt, they improved. When humans were restricted, they innovated elsewhere. He considered the question carefully. Resentment wastes energy, he replied. Redirection. The council believed we had removed humanity from the battlefield. In reality, we had removed the battlefield from humanity, and they flourished anyway. For the first time, I began to question the foundational assumption behind the ban. We believed their danger lay in warfare, in escalation, in doctrinal mutation, in casualty tolerance. But observing their peaceful expansion revealed something deeper. Conflict had not created their resilience, it had revealed it. Their true power was not destruction, it was adaptation under constraint.
Remove their weapons, they optimize logistics. Deny them combat, they master survival. Limit their exposure, they expand influence through necessity. Perhaps we had misunderstood the nature of the variable entirely. Perhaps humanity was not dangerous because they waged war so effectively. Perhaps they were dangerous because they thrived in adversity, and we had just given them a galaxy full of new problems to solve. As dependency curves rose and council reliance on human systems deepened, a realization formed slowly, almost imperceptibly. We had not contained them. We had integrated them into the foundation of our civilization. And if that foundation ever shifted, we would all move with it. It did not arrive with fleets. It did not broadcast demands. It did not hate us. It simply erased us. The first system vanished beyond mapped space, its star dimming as though swallowed by shadow. Long-range telescopes detected gravitational distortions inconsistent with any known stellar phenomenon. Then a second system folded inward, its planetary body stretched into luminous threads before disappearing. There was no enemy to target, no intelligence to negotiate with. Physics itself was failing. The anomaly expanded in silent, elegant horror, a sphere of warped spacetime devouring everything within its radius. Probes sent to investigate transmitted fragmented data before dissolving into cascading error signals. When Council fleets attempted approach, the results were catastrophic. Energy weapons passed harmlessly through distorted geometry. Projectile munitions curved unpredictably and vanished. Shield matrices destabilized under spatial shear, collapsing as if reality refused to anchor them. A Threx dreadnought, pride of its sector, disintegrated not from impact, but from contradiction. Sections of its hull existed in two coordinates simultaneously. It tore itself apart. For the first time in centuries, the elite hesitated. War doctrine offered no guidance against a phenomenon that was not alive, not sentient, not strategic. It was an equation devouring matter. Humans were not authorized for combat deployment, but this was not combat. It was extinction. The emergency session convened under visible strain. Projections displayed the anomaly's projected trajectory, accelerating, not randomly, but along a vector that would intersect 3 densely populated trade corridors within months. Evacuation was possible. Containment was not. Human representatives requested immediate involvement. Several delegates objected reflexively, citing the ban. Technicality clashed with urgency. Then a human astrophysicist transmitted a direct analysis to the chamber, models layered with bold, improbable solutions. "We can't fight it," she said. Her proposal was audacious to the point of recklessness. Construct experimental drives capable of navigating unstable spacetime gradients. Deploy synchronized gravitational anchors into the anomaly's core. Force an inward collapse. Trigger a controlled implosion, a viral analyst asked. "Low," she answered. There it was again. Not 0.
While the elite debated liability and jurisdiction, humans moved. Exploration vessels were refitted with reinforced structural lattices. Terraforming power cores were recalibrated for gravitic output. Civilian fabrication arrays produced anchor prototypes at industrial scale. They combined disaster response logistics with remnants of military coordination protocols, integrating command structures optimized for crisis. Other species calculated acceptable loss thresholds. Humans calculated possibility margins. When the anomaly consumed a fourth system ahead of projection, panic rippled through outer sectors. Refugee convoys clogged jump lanes. Economic markets destabilized. Human evacuation fleets rerouted traffic with ruthless efficiency. Trade vessels were repurposed as transports. Habitat rings detached from stable worlds to serve as temporary shelters. But even as they mitigated fallout, they prepared for insertion. The task force assembled beyond the anomaly's expanding perimeter. Dozens of human vessels, exploration cruisers, heavy carriers, modular constructs never intended for war. Their hulls glowed with experimental field stabilizers, emitting oscillating counterwaves against spatial distortion. I monitored the telemetry feed as they advanced. Reality bent around them. Stars elongated into spirals. Sensor data fractured into overlapping timelines. Probability matrices refused coherence. Several Allied observers withdrew at safe distance. The humans did not. As the task force crossed the event boundary, 3 ships vanished instantly, compressed into gravitational singularities too small to measure. No retreat signal followed. Inside the anomaly, space-time behaved like turbulent ocean currents. Ships drifted sideways through impossible vectors, communications fragmented into echoes from moments that had not yet occurred. Human engineers adapted in real time, adjusting drive harmonics, redistributing mass across hull sections, venting atmosphere to stabilize rotational anomalies. This was not combat, it was navigation through broken mathematics. At the anomaly's theoretical center, sensors identified a region of intensified curvature, a knot in reality. That was the target. The synchronized gravitational anchors were deployed one by one, each vessel holding position long enough to embed its payload into the distorted core. Losses mounted rapidly. Hull integrity alarms overlapped across the fleet channel. 2 carriers imploded when their stabilizers desynchronized by milliseconds. An exploration cruiser tore along its central axis as spatial gradients inverted. And still they anchored. From my distant vantage, I observed the Tattern forming, a lattice of gravitic nodes arranged in 3-dimensional geometry only partially comprehensible. The final command transmitted across the human fleet was calm.
The mark came. Anchors activated simultaneously. The anomaly convulsed. For an instant, space-time around the core flattened, then inverted. The outward expansion stalled, then began to collapse inward. Ships closest to the center were caught in the implosion wave, crushed into brilliant arcs of radiation. No escape vectors, no time. The task force did not attempt withdrawal. They held position to ensure full synchronization. The implosion intensified, folding warped geometry into itself. The sphere contracted, shrinking from system scale to planetary scale, then to stellar scale. Then, silence. Sensors cleared gradually. Gravitational distortion smoothed into predictable curves. Light resumed linear travel. Where the anomaly had existed, there remained only debris, residual radiation and fragments of matter expelled from collapsed systems. The human fleet was gone. Every vessel that entered the core was lost. But space was stable. The projected extinction trajectory vanished from council charts. Refugee flows slowed. Trade corridors recalibrated. Stellar bodies ceased elongation. The crisis ended not with triumph, but with absence. I accessed casualty manifests in the following cycles. Tens of thousands of human lives extinguished in an operation unauthorized under existing law. They had not sought permission once the scale became undeniable. They had acted. The elite reconvened in subdued atmosphere. No one mentioned the ban initially. It felt trivial against the backdrop of survival. One Threx delegate finally voiced what lingered unspoken. They were not fighting an enemy, he said. And they had won. Not through superior weaponry, not through dominance, but through audacity bordering on madness. The ban had removed humans from war. Yet when existence itself faltered, they responded as if the galaxy were their responsibility. I replayed the telemetry repeatedly, searching for recklessness. I found calculation, risk acknowledged, sacrifice accepted. The anomaly should have consumed half a sector before dissipating naturally, if ever. Instead, it imploded under synchronized human intervention. For the first time since the decree, a destabilizing thought surfaced openly within the elite. What if restricting them had never been about protecting the galaxy?
but about protecting ourselves from how far they were willing to go. As debris fields cooled and survivors rebuilt trade networks, the conclusion crystallized with uncomfortable clarity. The ban had not prevented escalation. It had merely delayed the moment we needed them most. And in that moment, they had not hesitated. Which left us facing a far more dangerous realization. If humanity would sacrifice itself to save us from physics, what would they do if the threat were us? The second convocation did not feel like the first. There were no trembling frequencies in the High Arbiter's voice. No undercurrent of fear disguised as policy. Only reckoning.
The grand convocation chamber glowed in subdued light, its prismatic arcs dimmed to respectful hues. Casualty reports floated in silent columns between delegates, human designations scrolling in endless lines. Exploration crews, engineers, civilian pilots. Names followed by a single word: deceased. Economic projections accompanied them. The anomaly's collapse had preserved 3 major trade corridors and 17 inhabited systems. The cost of inaction, extrapolated across standard cycles, would have exceeded comprehension. Sociological models displayed another unexpected result. Human internal stability had not fractured. They mourned publicly, broadcasting memorials across their networks. Their cities dimmed lights in synchronized tribute. Billions gathered beneath open skies. And then, they returned to work. Shipyards resumed construction. Research initiatives continued. Infrastructure expansion accelerated in sectors previously threatened. No political ultimatum was issued. No demand for privileged status submitted. No leverage extracted from gratitude. That restraint unsettled the elite more profoundly than any escalation curve ever had. If they had demanded authority, we could have negotiated. If they had threatened withdrawal of aid, we could have countered. Instead, humanity behaved as though saving the galaxy required no repayment. The session opened without ceremony. The High Arbiter addressed us plainly. The ban achieved its intended objective, he said. A pause. Revision. A diplomatic term for error. The Threx strategist rose first. His species honor marking shimmered in muted patterns. We evaluated them as destabilizing, he admitted. A murmur rippled. They are destabilizing, he continued. The Virel presented updated predictive models. Human inclusion in joint defense structures no longer increased long-term volatility beyond manageable thresholds. Why? Because the galaxy itself had adapted. Doctrinal flexibility had spread. Infrastructure resilience improved. Civilian-military integration models refined across species lines. Exposure to humanity had altered us. The Dravari Primarch stood next. We measured their escalation potential, he said. He projected a timeline from the anomaly crisis. At multiple junctures, humans could have leveraged their indispensability. They could have demanded amendment before deployment. They could have conditioned their intervention on political concession. They did none of it. They did not exploit advantage, the Primarch said quietly. That admission carried weight heavier than gravitic anchors. The vote to amend the decree was proposed. Not a full rescission, structure would remain. Oversight would persist. Joint command frameworks established to prevent unilateral escalation. Humans would not return as autonomous actors of war. They would return as integrated partners. The deliberation was not unanimous this time. 2 minor powers objected, citing historical caution, warning of cultural dilution, of accelerated change. Their concerns were not irrational, but they were no longer dominant, because the galaxy had already shifted. We were more adaptable now, less rigid, more prepared for instability. Humanity had not merely saved us from the anomaly, they had trained us, subtly, persistently, to endure volatility. The final vote threshold was reached. The decree was amended. Humanity of Sol was authorized to re-enter sanctioned defensive operations under Joint Strategic Command, not as a weapon unleashed, as a force aligned. When the human ambassador was summoned once more into the convocation chamber, I observed him carefully. The last time he had stood here, we removed him from war. Now we invited him back. He entered without flourish, oxygen envelope stabilizing around him. His posture remained composed, neither rigid nor relaxed. The High Arbiter delivered the amended decree. Humanity is recognized as an essential component of collective defense, he concluded. All attention shifted. If there was triumph in the human ambassador's expression, it was microscopic. What I perceived instead was something more complex. Resolve. And something else. Patience. As though this moment had been anticipated long before the anomaly, long before the ban. He inclined his head. Humanity accepts joint responsibility, he said. Not lead, not dominate. Stand with.
The simplicity of the phrasing carried profound implication. After the session adjourned, I reviewed the long arc of events. Zareth, escalation patterns, containment, the anomaly, sacrifice. The ban had been born from fear of what humanity might become if unrestricted. Its lifting was born from understanding what they already were. Not chaotic conquerors, not reckless aggressors. Controlled volatility. Terrifying in capacity, yes, but directed towards survival. The galaxy had not grown safer, it had grown stronger. Because now, when crisis emerged, whether born of war, physics, or our own miscalculation, we would not hesitate to include the species most willing to adapt beyond precedent. As the human delegation departed the chamber, I allowed one final analytical thought to surface. We believed we had contained them once. We believed we could regulate their influence. But partnership is not containment. It is exposure. And as humanity re-entered sanctioned defense, not as isolated actors, but as integrated allies, I understood something with quiet certainty. The next era of galactic history would not be defined by whether humanity escalated. It would be defined by how far we were willing to evolve alongside them. And for the first time, I was not certain which prospect unsettled me more. I record this not as warning, but as acknowledgement. For cycles uncounted, our civilizations measured stability by sameness. Systems endured because they resisted change. Species prospered because they obeyed precedent.
Humanity violated both principles from the moment they entered interstellar space. We feared humans because they changed every system they touched. Economic models shifted under their innovation. Military doctrine fractured under their unpredictability. Diplomatic conventions bent beneath their refusal to accept inevitability. They did not integrate quietly. They adapted, and in adapting, they transformed. We mistook transformation for destabilization. We feared them because they refused extinction. Where other species calculated acceptable losses, humans calculated possibilities. When confronted with annihilation-level threats, they did not preserve only what could be saved, they attempted to save everything. Their survival strategies were not merely defensive, they were creative. And creativity unsettles rigid hierarchies. We believed banning them would preserve balance. We believed removing their volatility would calm the galaxy. Instead, the crisis revealed a greater truth. Humanity does not require war to evolve. Conflict does not create their resilience, it reveals it. Pressure does not forge their ingenuity, it accelerates it. Loss does not teach them sacrifice, it clarifies what they already value. Resilience was present in their earliest records, from planetary disasters to resource scarcity. Ingenuity defined their ascent, solving problems other species deemed permanent constraints. Sacrifice shaped their cultures, individuals placing collective survival above personal gain, even without expectation of reward. The war did not invent these qualities, it merely exposed them at scale. We also learned something more unsettling: restraint. After victory, they did not consolidate power. After loss, they did not demand compensation. After exile, they did not seek retribution. They waited, not passively, patiently. If humanity ever turns against us, our projections suggest we may not endure. Their adaptability compounds faster than any known civilization. Their technological curve steepens under pressure. Their unity strengthens when threatened. But if we stand with them, the galaxy may survive anything. They are not destabilizing chaos, they are directed momentum. They are volatility with purpose. They are hope, sharpened by hardship, disciplined by loss, and guided by a species-wide refusal to surrender existence itself. And perhaps that is why we feared them. Not because they were monsters, but because they are what every civilization claims to aspire toward, and few achieve. Hope, weaponized by resilience, tempered by restraint, unstoppable not because they conquer, but because they endure.